So I think we've all heard that phrase that we want more student talk and less teacher talk. And I don't know if there's a teacher out there that would disagree with that statement, think that we all want to hear students' voices and have them be heard across the class period, have them collaborate with their peers in great conversations. And that is the goal. But have you ever had one of those class periods where all of a sudden the bell rings and you realize, like, oh crap, I just talked the entire class period? Or maybe you planned the student collaboration activity where students were supposed to collaborate with each other all class period and it was kind of open-ended. You thought it'd be great. And then all of a sudden, 5 minutes in, students are starting to come up to you saying, we're done talking, we finished, we don't really want to talk to each other anymore. So what goes wrong and how can we avoid both of those scenarios? Today, I'm going to walk you through ideas of how you can get really great student discussion and engagement in your language arts class period. So these are the three things that I believe that you need in order to have students talking and having great conversations. The first thing that you need is a reading framework where you know every day there's going to be specific places that you are going to be asking questions and having students talk. The second thing you're going to need questions that are related to the reading mini lesson for that day. So instead of always using kind of the same general questions like, tell me more about that, or what are your thoughts? What are you thinking now? Actually having some questions that are related to that mini lesson for the day. And the third thing is to ask students to respond to questions using a variety of methods. So I think kind of a teacher go-to is the whole, all right, I'm just going to ask the whole class and see who responds, and the same 2 to 3 students always respond. So while you can use that as one technique, just to list off a couple off the top of my head, you can obviously do like a partner turn and talk. You could do a teacher think aloud where you ask a question and you actually model how you would think and respond to it. You could have every student have a post-it note or notebook and jot down their thinking. You could kind of use like that initial share out in a partner or jot down your initial thinking and then share out as a whole class. You could have students share in small groups. You could have students do a think aloud in their own head. So I think it's very important to use a variety of different ways of how you're asking students to respond to those questions and not always using that ask the whole class and respond. That sucks out a lot of time and it gets students used to only 2 or 3 students' voices being heard. So I'm going to go through a little deeper and talk about if you have that consistent reading framework that you're using that students know about. This is what I'm referring to. This is the one I use, but yours might look a little different than this. I think the point is it has to be consistent and it should be something that students expect and know what is coming each day. So this is the one I use. I start out by telling them the reading mini lesson statement of the day. I go next into having them read a page of their book aloud to a partner and thinking about their fluency as they're reading it aloud. And then next I move into an interactive read aloud where I read aloud to students for about 10 to 15 minutes. Next, I go back into that mini lesson and I'm using that gradual release of responsibility as I'm modeling the mini lesson and then releasing it out to students and having them apply it independently. During the applications where students get their independent reading time, it's also when I can meet with small groups or one-on-one for reading conferences. Students are coming back at the end for that share. So this is the framework that I use. I'm going to make this bigger now so you can see this part a little bit better. But here is a sample of a reading mini lesson that I would use daily in the classroom. So it has that same structure that I just listed out, but it actually has the lesson plan written in. And what I've done is I've highlighted the places that I have planned to ask students questions. And these are where I'm going to ask students questions every single day. So every single day when I share the mini lesson statement and I give the teaching point that goes with it, possibly share an anchor charter student reference sheet, I have what I call a student connection question. So today, the mini lesson that I'm using to just model this for you is readers explain how the author organized the book by chunks of time, chapters, and/or parts so they can consider the impact of the organization on how they experience the book. So a student connection question for this particular mini lesson would be, have you read a book that uses multiple ways to organize the plot instead of just one? And get students to just think about that and connect to that. When we move on to the next piece, the oral reading fluency, where students are reading one page of their book aloud to a partner, I also have a mini lesson connection question that's coming back to the mini lesson statement, and it's in regards to that page they read aloud. So for this mini lesson, where does the page you read aloud fit into the book's overall organization? For example, is it part of a specific chapter, date, title of a section, etc.? So students are sharing where that fits into the organization of their book. During the interactive read aloud, I think this is a really important questioning part. So this is where you are taking that common text that all students are experiencing through you reading aloud to them, and you are modeling that thinking with the read aloud. This is the best way for students to understand what you're asking them to do as readers for the day. And so when I do an interactive read aloud, I like to ask a before reading question, plan 2 to 3 stopping points. I plan my stopping points by the types of ways I'm gonna have students respond. So I listed off a bunch of different options, but I would maybe pick a place where I'm gonna stop and do a think aloud, and a place where I'm gonna have students do like a sticky note stop and jot. And those might be my 2 stopping points during the mini lesson. And then I would come back after the interactive read aloud, and I would ask an after the reading question. Next up, I have the modeling, and then we'd go into the have a go. And the have a go is where you're releasing, during the modeling, you're really modeling that out to students exactly what you're asking them to do. The have a go is where they're going to take that first step. And I think taking that first step with partners is a really good way to do that. So for this mini lesson, I have students turning and talking to the question, what techniques does the author of your book use to organize the plot? And then they have their formative assessment, which I also call the application. And I always prepare about 5 or 6 questions related back to the mini lesson that I can ask either in reading conferences if I'm one-on-one with students, or a lot of times I do small group instruction. And those small groups instruction, I could just have students that are reading that common small group text, and I could be asking them these questions relating it back to the read aloud and just getting your pulse on how students are doing. Then the very end of class, I bring students back together for a share to share out the learning of the day. So for in this case, the share question is, what ways did your author use to organize the plot of your book? What do you like or dislike about your book's organization? So coming back, having a summary question. So those are the different places that I would ask questions. If you like how this is set up and you like the idea of these questions being prepared for you so that you would have lesson plans for 140 reading mini lessons across the year, I prepared all these questions for you in this format. I would highly recommend checking out my reading units at middle school reading units, MS reading units at a bit.ly link if you want to check them out. Like I said, I think, if you're kind of feeling stressed at all this year for trying to prepare lessons on top of everything else that's going on, this could be a really good thing to have prepared and ready to go for you. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about it, but also just be thinking about where in your lesson can you ask students meaningful questions that are connected back to that mini lesson. This is a blog post that I just wrote as well. So if you head on over to theliteracyeffect.com, you can see these examples that I've shared and just read more in depth about the ideas that I shared in this video. And I highly encourage you to do that as well. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.